So a little about me. I'm the executive director of Red River Theaters. I've been in the position for 7 years, and I grew up here in New Hampshire. As you know, is predominantly a white population. I was adopted, so I grew up with a white family, and ultimately, for me, media and art was a way to help kind of form my identity, which is kind of scary. So in being on this panel, I was really thinking about specifically in my identity, looking at things I grew up with. And these are I was a weird kid. I watched a lot of musicals and absorbed my Asian identity through these characters. And it's troubling too, as you can see, some of these are portrayed by white actors. And as a kid, I felt uncomfortable. I just didn't have the words. And my parents are very lovely people, Anne and Richard Lane, but they didn't necessarily have the tools to help with my own racial identity. So just talking about how art can trouble us, I mean, in our guts, as a child, I was uncomfortable with a lot of these portrayals. Sometimes I laughed along or identified with them. You know, as an Asian American, it was really, I could be a nerd. I was definitely not feeling cool ever. There was just a very small block for me to, or space for me to occupy. And I took media as a way to help build who I was in my personal identity. And when we're talking about confronting racism, I mean, when we look at these now, I think, you know, even when I watched Breakfast at Tiffany's, I didn't know that Mickey Rooney was not an Asian person, but even as a child, I was uncomfortable with that. But no one could explain that to me, and frankly, I laughed along too because everybody was laughing. So, you know, looking at these kind of portrayals and being able to unpack them now, you know, we can say and sit back and say, oh, well, we understand these to be, you know, racist portrayals or inappropriate casting, racist casting. Back then, I mean, and even today, as a leader of a movie theater, a lot of folks will say to me, well, you should show this, it's a classic. You know, I'm uncomfortable with that because I think that it requires context and the responsibility as someone who runs a cinema, and I have the power to control some of our programming, not all of it. It's really, you know, it sits with me, and I think about that a lot in my personal identity and what my responsibility is, and how we can confront this sort of racism that still, quite frankly, exists. The people who are making films or the people that are getting the spotlight, those folks are still mainly white, cisgendered. You know, we are still in troubled times. I think it is important that we, you know, as art can confront these in the way that we portray characters and being responsible. And the first thing I thought about was Hamilton and what a revelation that was for children growing up, and to be able to, it's almost different, right? Instead of casting a white person in an Asian role, you're portraying these historic characters with this different racial identity and what that means. So, you know, when thinking about this particular question, and looking at my personal point of view, you know, looking at how art, and particularly film, you know, the responsibility of making sure the programming, if there is something within this film, like having context, having the conversation, and really asking more of our audiences to confront and unpack, because I certainly was a passive consumer, and I still am probably in a lot of ways, like you know, but looking at things and trying to unpack it yourselves as an audience member to question it. Why was this actor cast? And what is, you know, why wasn't, you know, if this character is supposed to be, you know, Black, why is a white actor playing this character? So, but I think art is powerful, and film in particular is an opportunity to you know, if you stand up in front of people and tell them data, and tell them all of this scientific, you know, back it up and that doesn't necessarily get through, but art is different. It can hit your heart and your soul, and you know, it can change the way you feel about yourself. And as a young Asian woman growing up in New Hampshire, I tell the story a lot, but it was the first time I saw. It was Wayne's World. It was Tia Carrere, and it was this, and she was cool. She played in a band, and it truly was the first step where I was like, oh, Asian people can be cool. And so here I am at 44 years old, and I'm still unpacking that and confronting that, and still, even now, I get teary-eyed when I see programming like Never Have I Ever, or Crazy Rich Asians, and all these roles that might have BIPOC actors, but there's no specific reason that they're this is not a black role, this is not an Asian role. Those kind of things are happening now, not fast enough in my opinion, but I just think about those portrayals are being seen by young people now, and what that could have changed for myself. So.